Welcome to Twilight Fables, where your favourite bedtime stories descend into darkness. Tonight, we open the velvet curtains on a chilling retelling of Beauty and the Beast, a tale where innocence meets isolation and curiosity leads into the heart of something monstrous. So close your eyes and listen carefully. The village of Valewood sat at the edge of a dense and endless forest, pressed so close to the trees that some roots had wormed their way beneath the cottages, heaving up cobblestone paths and swallowing wooden fences. No maps marked Valewood's location, and no roads led to or from it. Most who lived there had been born within its circle of fog and frost, and few dared to leave. Those who did rarely returned. In Valewood, winter came early and left late. It draped over the village like a mourning veil, curling into corners and hanging from the eaves of houses like spider webs spun of ice. The air was always damp, and the sun seemed to forget the village existed. The people spoke in hushed tones and kept their doors bolted long before nightfall. There were stories, of course, whispered tales of the old forest and what might dwell within it, but no one spoke them aloud, not unless they wanted to tempt fate. Belle was not like the others. She was born beneath a sky of storm clouds and raised by a father who taught her to see beauty in broken things. Her mother had died in childbirth, they said, a quiet tragedy wrapped in silence, but her father, Maurice, had filled their small home with strange inventions, tinkering gadgets, and whispered lullabies in the dead of night. Belle loved stories, not the pale, watered-down folk tales that passed for education in Valewood, but real stories, those with blood in their teeth and shadows in their pages. She scoured her father's old books and read by candlelight, long after the village settled into uneasy slumber. She read of castles swallowed by thorns and forests that breathed. She read of curses and creatures, of women who wandered too far and vanished without a trace. She read of monsters that wore the faces of men, but Belle did not fear them. She only feared the silence, how it crept through their home like a draught through an open window. Her father had changed in recent months. His eyes, once alight with wonder, had grown distant. He no longer sang while he worked. He no longer built. He only listened. "Do you hear it?" he asked her one evening as wind rattled the shutters. "The humming. It's coming from the trees." Belle had tilted her head. "It's just the wind, Papa." "No." Maurice shook his head slowly, his beard unkempt, his breath scented faintly of something metallic. "No, it's not the wind. It sings to me." That night, Belle awoke to find her father standing in the doorway, staring into the black forest with the door wide open. Snow swirled past him, gathering at his feet. "Papa," she whispered. He did not turn. By morning, he was gone. The village helped her search, of course, The men lit torches and combed the tree line, calling Morris's name into the thick, white fog. But no footprints marked the ground. Beyond the edge, no trail, no blood, no hint. Belle was left alone, the door still ajar. She could not eat, she could not sleep. Every creak of the house felt like a voice trying to speak through the walls. And then, a week later, her father's horse came back alone, saddlebags torn, eyes wild, and in the saddlebag, nestled like a secret, a single red rose. Its petals were still dewy, impossibly alive despite the dead of winter. Its scent was rich, cloying, thick like rot hidden beneath perfume. Belle's hands trembled as she touched it, and in that moment something changed. The room tilted, a draught slithered across her neck. She knew where she had to go. The village begged her not to. They warned her of the forest, the beasts, the whispers that led travellers astray. But Belle's mind was ironclad with resolve. She would not sit idly by and let her father vanish like smoke. She packed what little she needed and kissed the cold frame of their door. Before stepping out, the forest swallowed her whole. The trees grew impossibly tall, their limbs knotted like fingers, poised to pluck her from the ground. Fog curled around her ankles, thick and opaque, distorting shape and distance. Every sound was muffled, as if the forest absorbed noise like a sponge. Belle walked for hours, perhaps days. It was hard to tell time when the sun barely bled through the canopy. She followed the strange pull in her chest, like a thread tied to her ribs, leading her deeper into the woods. Sometimes she saw movement just out of sight, shadows ducking behind trees, low rustles. Once she thought she saw eyes glowing in the underbrush. She did not run. At last the trees parted and she found it, a castle, but not one from fairy tales. No banners flew, no golden spires glittered in the light. This castle was a ruin of stone and vine, its gates rusted shut and its towers crumbling. Ivy clung to its bones like veins, and yet the windows glowed with firelight. The doors creaked open at her touch. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. The hearths were lit, candles flickered along the walls, and the air smelled of roses and something bitter, coppery, like blood and rain. The castle was not empty. She could feel it watching her. Every corridor felt like a throat she was walking down. Every room had secrets pressed into its walls. She called for her father. No answer. She wandered through halls of broken mirrors and cracked portraits. Dust hung like fog in the shafts of golden light. A music box played somewhere, faint and off-key. She followed the sound down a corridor that seemed longer than it should have been, impossible in length, as if stretched by some dreaming god. At the end was a door. Carved into it, A rose surrounded by thorns. Belle reached for the handle. It was warm. She stepped inside. The room was circular, with walls lined in shelves, stacked with glass jars. Each jar held something different. Shards of mirror, teeth, locks of hair, small animal skulls. In the centre was a spindle, glistening black like obsidian, its needle slick with red. And beside it, a bed. Her father lay in it, eyes open, unmoving. Belle screamed. Something moved in the shadows behind her, something large. Her scream echoed down the long, stone throat of the castle. Belle's fingers slipped as she stumbled backward, knocking a glass jar from the shelf. It shattered at her feet. Splinters of glass, a child's milk tooth, a brittle fingertip curled like a sleeping worm. She barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on her father. Morris lay atop the bed, still clothed, his hands folded neatly over his chest, like a man in a coffin. But he was not dead, at least, not fully. His chest rose and fell with the slow, deliberate rhythm of dreamless sleep. His eyes remained open, glazed, watching nothing. Belle leaned over him, sobbing, whispering his name, but his lips never moved. He did not blink. His skin was ice. "Papa," she whispered, cradling his face. "Wake up, please." And then the whisper came, not from him, not from any living thing, but from the very walls. "He is taken." Belle froze. She turned slowly. The door had shut behind her. The room was empty. No, worse than empty. It felt full. The air pulsed as though the walls were breathing. And that voice, it had no mouth, no weight, but it had intent. She gripped her father's hand. It twitched faintly in her grasp. Not enough to call life, but enough to promise it hadn't fled completely. "What do you want from us?" she demanded. A pause. Then, "You came." That was all. The silence afterward felt heavier than the words. She backed away from the bed, her boots crunching over shards of glass and fragments of bones. Her hand pressed to her lips to muffle her breathing. A presence moved along the edges of the room. She didn't see it, but she felt it. It paced in circles just out of sight, testing the seams of her sanity. Then the candles went out, all at once, and Belle ran. The corridor shifted. She turned left and found herself in a hall she didn't recognize. She doubled back and found the staircase was gone. The castle was no longer stone and wood. It was alive, a beast with endless intestines. Doors led to other doors. Stairs spiraled downward, only to lead up again. Mirrors no longer showed her reflection. Some showed her father, lying still. Others showed her, rotting. She cried out until her voice was raw. No answer, not even her echo. She found herself in a vast dining room, the table set with a feast, long since ruined. Mould-blackened fruit sagged on silver platters. Roast meat had withered to gristle. Mice picked at crusted bone. Candles flickered along the table's length. Each flame steady despite the lack of wind. She stepped closer, and every candle flared at once. Something was seated at the head of the table. She hadn't seen it at first. The shadows clung to its form like drapery, hiding its shape. It was too tall, too still. Its face was concealed beneath a mask of porcelain, cracked and yellowed with age. The mask was sculpted into a smile too wide, too knowing. The creature wore velvet robes that looked like they had once belonged to a king, now torn and stained. Its hands rested on the table, claws curled in thought. Belle froze. "You," she whispered. The creature said nothing. "You did this to my father?" Still no answer. "What are you?" The thing stood. It towered over her, its antlers scraping the rafters. Antlers, or something worse. Branches maybe, twisted and fossilized, sprouting from the base of its skull like a crown. Its mouth behind the mask was a dark line unseen yet felt. "Speak to me." It stepped toward her. Belle backed away, heart pounding, searching for something, anything, to use as a weapon. "I came for my father," she said, voice trembling. "If you want someone, take me instead." The creature paused. It cocked its head as if listening, then it spoke, but not aloud. The words bloomed in her mind, icy and uninvited. "You have already offered yourself." And Belle collapsed. When she woke, she was lying on a four-poster bed in a grand chamber lit by golden lanterns. Her head throbbed, her limbs felt weak, her boots had been removed. The castle was quiet again, and her mind was not her own. She sat up, heart racing, and saw a dress folded neatly at the end of the bed, deep red velvet, trimmed with lace. It shimmered faintly in the light. She didn't want to touch it, but she was cold. She changed and stepped barefoot into the hallway. The castle was different now, warmer. The air no longer reeked of rot. The halls were quiet, the shadows tame. She passed by windows that showed daylight, though she'd never seen it break through the trees in Valewood. She followed the corridor until it opened into a library, a cathedral of books. Shelves stretched to impossible heights. Ladders rolled across the walls. Dust motes danced like snowflakes in the light. Her breath caught in her throat, and seated beside the fireplace, reading a book far too small for its hands, the creature, the beast. Belle turned to flee, but the door shut behind her, not with force, but with certainty. She turned back. The beast did not move. It slowly, deliberately turned a page. "I want to see him," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The beast tilted its head. "My father, I want to see him." It closed the book. "You may stay, or you may leave. If you leave, he dies." The words were not cruel, just indifferent. Belle's fists clenched. Why him? Why not any other traveller? The beast rose because he heard the song. A pause, the crackle of fire behind it. So did you. Belle swallowed. So it's a trap? No, a call. The beast began to walk toward her, slow and deliberate. The castle once. It reached her, towering above. Its mask gleamed in the firelight. For a moment, Belle felt her knees buckle. You will stay. You will be safe. You will be loved. I don't want your love. It leaned in closer, her breath fogged on its mask. You will. And then it vanished, melting into shadow, slipping into the cracks between the walls. Belle was alone again, but not truly. The castle listened. The days passed like dreams, thick and honey slow. Belle wandered the halls. She ate food that appeared for her, always warm, always perfect, always wrong. No matter what she requested, it tasted faintly of roses and iron. She began to hear music, not from an instrument, but from the stone itself. Soft notes humming beneath her feet, like a lullaby she'd known as a child. At first, she resisted. She screamed, threw her meals, demanded to be let go. The castle did not answer. Eventually, she stopped asking. In the evenings, the beast appeared again, always in a different room, always watching. It would offer her books, ask her questions in its voiceless way. It never came close, never touched her, but it was always near. I won't fall in love with you, she told it one night, in the rose garden, where the flowers bloomed in the snow. The beast tilted its head. You already have, just not with me. She stared at it. Then with what? The castle. The wind picked up, and the roses rustled. Belle felt it then, that the ground beneath her had a heartbeat, that the walls were breathing, and in the windows of the distant towers, figures moved. One night, she dreamed of her father again. He was sitting in his bed, staring at the ceiling, and beside him, brushing his hair with a clawed hand, was the beast. Only it wore her face. The dream clung to Belle long after she woke. Even in daylight, if such a thing existed here, she could still feel the wet scrape of her own claws brushing her father's hair, still see her own face stretched into a mask of gentle malice. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. The castle didn't like screaming. It punished her when she screamed. Instead, Belle dressed in silence. The red velvet gown lay folded at the foot of her bed, just as it had every morning since she arrived. She'd stopped questioning who placed it there. She had stopped questioning a lot of things. The food that appeared warm on silver trays, the fire that never needed tending, the way the walls pulsed in her peripheral vision, like the inside of a throat. She pulled the gown over her shoulders and stepped into the hall. Outside her room, the corridor smelled of roses and rot. Belle wandered without direction now. That's what the castle wanted. No plans, no questions, just drifting. The corridors shifted behind her, walls rearranging themselves like bones being reset. She no longer even tried to find her way back to the front gates. They had long since vanished. Her path today led her to the garden, a place of impossible beauty. Vines that glistened like strands of hair, trees whose bark shimmered like fish scales, petals that bled red ink when plucked, birds with glass eyes and broken wings that still managed to sing. She came here often. Today, she followed the trail of white stones, winding through the roses until she reached the gazebo in the centre, a stone structure draped in ivy, always cool no matter the season. It was there the beast sometimes waited, reading, thinking, watching. But today he was absent. Only the silence greeted her. She stepped inside. The air here was different, less like breath, more like memory. It smelled like her mother's perfume and the old paper of her childhood books. She sat on the marble bench and closed her eyes. The moment she did, the whispers began, faint, fickle, just at the edge of understanding. She pressed her fingers to her ears. The whispers burrowed deeper. Do you remember the girl who came before you? Belle opened her eyes. The garden was the same, but the air had stilled. A cold shadow passed behind one of the trees. She turned, but nothing was there. Then the voice came again. Not the beast, not the castle. Another. She danced in these gardens too. She wept by that rose bush. Belle stood. Who are you? She called. The whisper answered with a laugh. You know me. No, You wore my face in the dream. Do you remember now? Belle backed away from the gazebo. The vines stirred as though in a breeze. Petals fell like tears. And then something moved behind the rose hedge. It was quick, just a flash, a face, a woman, pale, wide-eyed, her mouth stitched shut with thread, the colour of dried blood. Belle screamed, and the garden screamed with her. Flowers snapped their stems, vines whipped through the air, the trees groaned, the gazebo trembled, and then she was no longer alone. The beast emerged from the hedge, not running, but sliding, like shadow pulled forward by hunger. Its mask gleamed. Its antlers caught the sun like iron traps. It reached for her. Belle fell backward. Her dress snagged on thorns. Stop, she cried. What was that? Who was she? The beast tilted its head. You saw her. Yes, she looked like me. You are not the first. The air thickened. Belle clutched her stomach. A sudden nausea churned inside her, bile and memory twisting together. What happened to her? She stayed. The beast stepped closer. Its claws grazed the air inches from her face. She tried to leave, but the castle loved her too much. Belle scrambled to her feet, heart hammering. Is that what happened to my father? The beast didn't answer. It turned and walked back into the thorns, and then it was gone. That night, Belle refused to sleep. She barricaded her door with chairs and furniture. She stayed by the hearth with a poker in her hand, her gown soaked with garden dirt and sweat. But the castle does not need doors. She blinked, and the fire had gone out. She blinked again, and the room had changed. She was no longer in her chamber. She stood in the hall of mirrors. Endless reflections surrounded her, each one showing a version of herself. In some, she wore a crown. In others, a mask. In one, she saw herself gnawing on a raw bone, and in the centre, her father, not lying in bed, but standing, his skin stretched thin, his eyes hollow. He opened his mouth, and moss poured out. She screamed and woke, still in her room, still alone, but the poker was gone. Days passed, or hours, or years. Time twisted inside the castle. Belle stopped counting. She stopped speaking. The beast no longer visited every night. When it did, it asked strange questions. Do you still dream? Do you miss the stars? What do you think lives in the well beneath the east tower? Belle didn't answer, not anymore, but she listened, and the castle listened too. One morning, she woke to find her door open. That had never happened before. On the floor just outside was a plate of raw meat, still steaming. She kicked it down the hall. The castle didn't send another. She began hearing things behind the walls, footsteps, breathing. Sometimes a voice that sounded like her own. Once she pressed her ear to the stone and whispered, "Who are you?" The answer came like thunder through her skull. "I am the bride." She recoiled, stumbled backward. The stone where her ear had rested was warm and pulsing. The beast came to her again in the library. She sat in a high-backed chair, reading a book where the pages rewrote themselves every time she blinked. One moment, a love story. The next, a confession. Then, a eulogy. The beast entered without sound. Belle didn't look up. "What do you want from me?" she asked. The beast stepped closer. "I want you to stay. And if I don't," the fire beside them flared, "you already have." She slammed the book shut. "That isn't an answer." The beast tilted its head. "You are the answer." "To what?" The fire whispered behind her. The walls leaned in. "To why I'm still alive." Belle's mouth went dry. "You were human once." A pause. The mask dipped in a slow nod. She stepped toward it, trembling. "Then, how do I break the curse?" The mask said nothing. Only the eyes behind it flickered. "You must love me." "No," Belle said. "You mean the castle?" Another pause. Longer. It does not know the difference anymore. Belle stepped back, and in her mind, she heard the door close. Not just behind her, but inside her. That night, she stood at the highest window. The stars above Valewood were foreign, wrong. They pulsed like open eyes. One of them bled. She thought of jumping, but the wind spoke. Not yet. She turned. The beast stood beside her. It held out a hand. Behind it, the rose garden bloomed. Only this time, the roses had faces, and they were all hers. The castle had many rooms Belle hadn't yet discovered. Some she avoided by instinct. Others seemed to avoid her, vanishing whenever she tried to find them again. But one morning, she awoke with a name etched into her memory, like it had always been there. The mirror room. She didn't know where it was or who had whispered it into her dreams, but she knew she had to find it. The corridors obeyed her now. She had stopped wondering how they shifted, stopped questioning the subtle rearrangement of halls and staircases. The castle responded to desire, and it wanted her to want things. This morning, her desire was to find the room where reflections told the truth. She passed the garden, now dormant. The roses had closed their faces. The birds had plucked out their own glass eyes and nestled blind in the snowless trees. The gazebo was draped in velvet cloths, the air too quiet. Belle kept walking, past the corridor where the portraits bled, past the banquet hall where food moulded faster than it could be eaten, past the open mouth of the East Tower where once she heard sobbing and never went back. And then she found the door. It was black, not painted, but truly black, a void carved into the wall, framed by bone-white ivy that writhed when she looked too long. Her hand hesitated on the iron handle. It was cold, not in temperature, but in feeling, like grief, like absence, like something waiting to be remembered. She opened the door and stepped inside. The mirror room was silent, not quiet, silent, as if sound itself had been banished. It was vast, circular, without ceiling or floor that she could see, only endless darkness broken by the curve of mirrors stretching into infinity. Dozens of them, each one tall and jagged, mismatched in design. Some were as slender as coffin lids, others wide like chapel doors. Some stood upright, others leaned crookedly, cracked like eggshells. The surfaces rippled gently, like disturbed water. Belle stepped forward. Her reflection did not follow. In the first mirror, she saw herself, young, wide-eyed, terrified, but her eyes were missing, just two black voids staring back. In the second, she was laughing, but her mouth was too wide, too many teeth. In the third, she was herself, except her gown was red, soaked to the waist. Her hands clutched a crown made of teeth. She turned away, but the mirrors whispered, "See us, remember, come closer." She shouldn't have, but she did, and one by one the mirrors began to move. Not the glass, but the reflections. Each version of her stepped forward, in perfect time, lips moving, eyes wild, and they all said the same thing. "You've been here before." Belle's knees buckled, the mirrors rippled. In one, she saw her father, sitting at a table, smiling, but his smile faltered. His skin began to peel back, layer by layer, until only a weeping skull remained. In another, she saw the beast, unmasked, but the face beneath shifted too fast to grasp. A man, a boy, a beast again, a face made of roses, then of maggots, then of her own father's smile. The mirror shattered, and the others followed, cracked legs raced across the glass like lightning veins. Belle turned to run, but there was no door anymore, only more mirrors. The room had grown. Now, at the far end, stood one final mirror, massive, shapeless, pulsing. She approached, not by choice. Her legs moved without command. Her breath fogged the air, even though it was warm. The mirror stretched up and up until it consumed the ceilingless void. Inside it, not her, not anyone, only a single red rose, floating in black water, and then a hand, long, pale, familiar. It reached up from beneath the surface. It was hers. It gripped the stem of the rose and crushed it. The water turned black with ink. The hand curled into a claw. The reflection leaned forward until the surface shimmered, and then the reflection stepped out. Belle fell backward. Her other self stared down at her, not monstrous, not bleeding, just tired. "You've been here before," it said. Belle's voice caught. "What is this?" The reflection crouched beside her. "You always ask. You never remember. That's the price." "Of what?" "Being the last one." Belle shook her head. "I don't understand." "No," said the reflection, "but you will." And then it melted, not exploded, not faded, melted like candle wax. Belle screamed, and the mirror screamed back. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was back in her room. The beast came to her that night. No dinner, no questions, only presence. It stood at the foot of her bed, cloaked in shadow. The antlers brushed the ceiling. Belle sat up. Her voice was hoarse. "I found the mirror room." The beast said nothing. "I saw her, me. I don't know what she was." The beast tilted its head. The fire whispered behind it. "She is the part of you that never left." Belle's mouth was dry. "Am I dying?" "No." "Is this a dream?" "No." "Then what am I?" The beast approached, slowly, carefully. It knelt and placed a clawed hand over her heart. "You are the garden." Belle's breath hitched. "You are the locked door, the key, the hand that turns it." She wanted to push it away, to scream, but her hands remained in her lap. "You are the story." And then the fire died, and the beast was gone. She didn't sleep again that night, or the next. The castle did not seem to notice, or perhaps it approved. It fed her less now, watered her less, but she didn't starve. She grew. On the 7th night, she returned to the garden. The roses had opened their faces once more. They smiled at her. The beast was waiting by the gazebo, not reading, not watching, just waiting. Belle approached, not out of duty, not out of fear, but out of knowing. "I remember," she said. The beast inclined its head. "I was the one before, and before that." "Yes." "And I'll be the one after." "Yes." Belle looked to the sky. The stars blinked. "What do you want from me now?" The beast held out a mirror. Not a grand one, just a small, hand-sized shard of glass. Belle took it. The reflection inside smiled. It had no eyes. The garden changed after she remembered. It didn't bloom. It breathed. The roses no longer simply opened. They whispered, hummed, moaned. The trees no longer rustled with wind, but murmured in low, guttural tones, as though trying to form words. The ivy on the castle walls slithered visibly now, curling with intention around the stone. And Belle walked among them like she belonged, because she did. She had always belonged. She just hadn't remembered. The mirror shard never left her hand. It had fused to her fingers, the handle wrapping around her palm like a second skeleton. She no longer saw herself in it, but saw possibilities, 1,000 versions of Belle, flickering like candlelight, some with crowns, some with thorns in their eyes, some lying dead in forgotten gardens, some smiling. That was the worst. Those ones smiled. She avoided the shard after that, but it still watched her, reflected from puddles, from windows, from the curve of silverware at the silent breakfast she never ate. The castle gave her what she needed, but never what she wanted. Not anymore. The beast had not returned since the night of the garden, but Belle felt its presence, in the walls, in the hum of the stone, in the way the wind refused to blow in her direction, as if it knew better. She caught glimpses, antlers behind a column, a claw gripping the edge of a banister, a low growl under her bed, while she slept with eyes wide open. She wasn't afraid. That too had been taken or traded. She wasn't sure. One morning, though the sun never truly rose, she awoke to find the roses blooming in spirals. Perfect, concentric spirals that twisted toward a centre. She followed them, deeper into the garden than she'd ever dared, past the marble statues that now wept rust instead of rain, past the topiary beasts that had begun to reshape themselves to match her outline, past the thicket of thorns that whispered her name in a dozen voices. Belle! 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 She reached the heart of the garden and found the fountain. It hadn't been there before, or it had, but only now chose to be seen. It was made of bones, not carved, but grown, ribs interwoven like flower petals, spines arching upward to form a basin, skulls carefully arranged to pour a constant trickle of black water from their mouths. The sound was like breathing, in, out, in, out. The water rippled when she approached. Her mirror shard pulsed in her hand. She peered into the basin and saw a face, not hers, not the beast's, but a girl, young, pale, her lips sewn shut, her eyes wide with warning, and behind her 12 other faces, girls, all of them Belle, and none of them her. The garden fell silent, even the fountain held its breath, and then the girl in the water moved. She looked up. "Do you remember us?" she mouthed. Belle tried to answer, but her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The mirror shard hissed. One of the faces in the fountain began to rot, melting like wax, flesh slipping from bone, eyes clouding with milky white. The other faces began to scream. No sound, only anguish. And then the girl with sewn lips reached through the water. Belle stepped back, but too late. The hand gripped her wrist and pulled. She didn't fall into the fountain. The fountain fell into her. The world flipped. The sky became water and the ground became mirror. Belle found herself in a garden that was not a garden, where roses were made of skin, and the air buzzed with the sound of teeth grinding against teeth. The sky was purple. The sun was a gaping mouth. The castle in the distance had no doors, just open eyes, watching. Belle stood at the edge of a pit, and inside that pit, Belle, 12 of her, all chained to the ground by hair made of vines, their mouths sewn shut, their fingers broken into prayer shapes. Each one looked up as she arrived. The 13th Belle, the final one, the current one, and in perfect unison they mouthed, "Run," but she couldn't, because the 13th wasn't her. She was already in the pit, and someone else was wearing her skin. The girl at the edge of the pit smiled. Her face was Belle's, but her eyes were solid black. She held the mirror shard, now reshaped into a dagger. The chained bells below screamed through sealed lips. The dagger gleamed, and then the sky cracked, the castle howled, and Belle woke up. She was in her bed. The fire was out. The room was cold. The mirror shard lay on her pillow, warm with blood. She was bleeding from her palm, not cut, bitten. That day, the castle grew teeth. The doorway to the west wing developed fangs that ground against each other when she passed. The floorboards snapped at her heels. The chandelier above the ballroom hung with ropes that twisted into nooses whenever she blinked. The air was thicker now. Breathing took effort, and always, always, she heard footsteps behind her, but when she turned, nothing, only shadows and roses that had moved slightly. Belle began to hum to herself, a lullaby she didn't remember learning, words from a language she couldn't name. It soothed the castle, temporarily, and sometimes it wept when she sang. The walls dripped brine, the mirrors fogged with breath, the roses bowed their heads. It was enough to keep her sane, or something close. But that night, the beast returned, not as a creature, as a man. He entered her chamber silently, tall, pale, beautiful. His face was cruel and familiar, eyes like funeral silk, hair long, curling like smoke. He sat in the chair across from her bed and watched her. She didn't scream. He looked like the paintings, the ones in the forbidden halls, the ones that aged in reverse when she stared too long. "I remember you," she whispered. His smile was thin. "I'm glad," he said. His voice was not the beast's, and yet it was. "You're him," she said, "the one before. I'm what remains." "Of what?" He tilted his head. "The story, the bargain, the garden." Belle swallowed. She couldn't look away. "Why now?" "Because you're beginning to forget again." No, I remember. The pit, the other bells, the fountain. He raised a hand. She fell silent. It doesn't matter. You'll forget again. They always do. She trembled. Then why keep me here? He stood, not walked, stood. Instantly, the chair behind him crumbled into rot to tend the story. And then he was gone. Only ashes remained. Belle didn't sleep that night, or the next. She no longer needed to. The castle had begun humming to her in her own voice, and she hummed back. The mirror shard was now a full-length mirror. She didn't remember how. She only knew it belonged there, in the corner of her room, facing her bed, watching. She had become the garden. She had become the mouth. She had become the tail. But deep inside, buried beneath roots of names and memories, something still flickered. A face, not hers, not the beast's, a child's face, watching from behind a locked door, mouth sewn shut, holding a rose. There was a door. Belle had passed it before, or perhaps she hadn't. It was small, child-sized, at the far end of a corridor that twisted at impossible angles, lined with mirrors that showed the wrong moments, her walking backward, her blinking too slowly, her mouth moving, though she made no sound. The door hadn't been there yesterday, but then again, neither had the corridor. She approached. The wood was soft, pulsing with warmth like living skin. The handle was bone, and when she grasped it, it exhaled a long, slow breath of something that smelled like memory. Her hand trembled, not from fear, from familiarity. She knew this door. She had been behind it, or locked it, or both. It opened soundlessly. The room beyond was circular. No windows, no visible ceiling, just spirals of wallpaper peeling at the edges, revealing more wallpaper beneath, layers upon layers, like scabs torn from the same wound. In the centre, a chair, and on the chair, a child, a girl, still, pale, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut with red thread. A rose lay in her lap, wilted, blackened at the edges. Belle didn't move. The child opened her eyes. They were mirrors, and Belle saw herself, fractured into 1,000 pieces, screaming silently. The child pointed to the wall behind her. Belle turned. The wall was covered in writing, etched into plaster, with something sharp and desperate. Some of the words bled, others moved when she tried to read them, but one line repeated over and over. We made her. Belle's breath caught. She stepped closer. The child hadn't moved, but her shadow had grown. Now it sprawled across the floor, reaching for Belle's feet like tendrils. She ignored it, focused on the writing. Another line stood out, this one deeper, angrier. They were never bears. Her blood ran cold. She backed away. The child's rose burst into flame, but she didn't flinch, just watched Belle with wide, mirrored eyes, and then her lips parted, threads snapping one by one, each pop echoing like thunder. Belle wanted to run, but she stayed because she had to hear it. The child's voice was brittle, ancient, and far too loud for such a small body. You're the last one. The room disappeared, not like a blink, more like a breath held too long. Belle found herself in the West Wing. She hadn't meant to go there. No one meant to. It was where the castle bled. The hallways dripped candle wax that whispered regrets. The portraits screamed when looked at directly, and the chandelier above the staircase held shapes that never stopped twitching. She walked slowly. Everything here remembered. Even the air tasted of names. She reached the end of the hall. The double doors of the forbidden chamber loomed before her, clawed, scorched, weeping light from the cracks. Last time she had knocked. This time she didn't. She pushed the doors open. The room had changed. There was no wilting rose in a glass dome, no shredded curtains or shattered furniture, just a single bed, and on it, herself, sleeping, peaceful, breathing slow and deep. Belle stepped forward. The version of herself on the bed stirred and opened her eyes. Not mirrors, not black voids, just eyes, soft, sad, human. I'm tired, the other Belle whispered. Belle nodded. I know. Do you remember? Some of it. Enough? No. The sleeping Belle sat up. She reached out, and their fingers touched. And Belle remembered the first story, not the one told to children, not the one with teacups and true love. The first one, the story written in bone and breath, where beauty was never about kindness, where the beast had 100 faces, where every girl who walked into the castle became part of the garden, because the garden was hungry, and the castle was its mouth, and the rose was bait. Belle fell, not through the floor, through herself, memories unspooled. She saw every Belle before her, the one who ran, the one who screamed, the one who tried to make a deal, the one who kissed the beast and turned to ash. She saw the beast too, not a man, not a monster, but a shape, a need, a story that could not end until it was satisfied. And she saw the child again, the girl in the chair, the first one, the one they all came from, the one they made. And then blackness. She woke in the garden, surrounded by roses with mouths instead of petals. Each one whispered a different name. Annabelle, Clara, Juliet, Margot. None of them were hers, and yet they were all hers. The fountain had grown taller. Now it reached toward the sky, branching into limbs that resembled antlers and arms and wings. The black water had turned red. The skulls had multiplied, and in the reflection of the basin, Belle saw no face, only the beast, and the beast was smiling. That night, she did not dream. She was the dream. The castle slept around her, curling in on itself like a cat, and she wandered its bones without resistance. Doors opened before she touched them, candles lit before she approached, and always, in every mirror, the child, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, sometimes holding the rose, now blooming again. Belle whispered to her once, "Why me?" The child answered without moving her lips, Because you remember the ending. Belle frowned. What ending? The child tilted her head. The one where you never leave. At dawn, though no sun rose, Belle returned to the ballroom. It was filled with guests. None moved. They were made of wax, of leaves, of bone. Some wore masks that wept. Some had no faces at all. They turned to her as she entered. Music began to play, a waltz in reverse, and at the top of the staircase stood the beast. Not man, not monster, but shadow, crowned in antlers, clothed in smoke, eyes like lanterns in the fog. He offered his hand. She took it. They danced. Around the room the guests bowed, and in the mirrors the castle rotted. Vines climbed over chandeliers. Blood pooled beneath the floorboards. The garden bloomed black, and above them, high in the rafters, the child watched, sewing another mouth shut. Another girl, another Belle, another story. The garden was different now. It no longer resembled anything earthly. No trimmed hedges, no gentle stone paths, or perfumed blossoms. The transformation had completed itself quietly, as if time in the castle had exhaled and allowed the rot to take root. Where roses once grew, there were now faces, dozens, hundreds, each emerging from the stems like bloated fruit, eyes sealed shut or wide open, lips parted in silent songs. Some murmured faintly, others wept. Belle moved between them. Each face looked familiar, not quite reflections, not quite strangers. Girls she'd known in dreams, or perhaps girls she'd once been. There was no wind in this place, no bird song, only the sound of the soil breathing. She came to the heart of the garden, where the great thorn tree stood. It rose from the centre like a spire of bone, black bark etched with runes that shifted the longer she stared. It had grown taller. Now it reached the sky, or what little of the sky remained, grey, pulsing, stitched with veins of red light. At the tree's base was a mirror, cracked, warped, buried halfway in the dirt. Belle knelt before it. She didn't see her face. She saw her mother's. It wasn't a memory. It was a truth, unearthed. Her mother's face, pale and sharp and resolute, stared up at her through the glass, not frightened, not pleading, waiting. Belle had no recollection of her mother's disappearance, only a vague bedtime story, whispered by her father when drunk and half asleep. Something about a sickness, about a storm, about a woman who went into the woods and never returned. But here she was, not dead, not gone, bound. The tree groaned above her, and a single thorn fell, embedding itself in the dirt beside Belle's knee. It pulsed once, then vanished. The mirror shimmered. Her mother's lips moved. No sound, just a name, not Belle's, not her own, a different name, one Belle recognised from the ballroom portraits. Delphine. The mirror cracked further. The beast found her in the garden. He did not speak. He never truly had. But Belle understood him now, understood the weight of him. Not just a creature, but a curse given form. A keeper of stories that should never be told. A jailer of the first girls, the unloved girls, the ones who bargained with darkness when no one else would. He offered her something, not freedom, not love, a choice. One hand extended, the same thorn that had fallen earlier, now grown into a key, obsidian black, glistening like wet ink. The other hand, a veil, stitched from shadows, 2 paths. One would unlock the oldest door, the other would allow her to forget, to sleep forever in a dream made just for her, a happily ever after, sewn from lies. Belle reached for the key. The beast didn't stop her. His smile widened, and then he stepped back into the garden and vanished. She returned to the west wing, to the room of mirrors, to the child who was now taller, her rose fully bloomed, thorns weaving around her limbs like armour. The child said nothing. She simply pointed to the corner of the room where another door had appeared, not child-sized, not hidden, just a door, tall, plain, made of old wood and darker promises. The key in Belle's hand fit perfectly. It clicked once, and the air changed. The castle shivered, and Belle stepped through. The hall beyond was silent. No whispers, no flickering lights, just rows of portraits, each frame taller than a man, each painting the same. A girl in a white gown, eyes hollow, mouth sewn shut. Some wore crowns of antlers, some held roses, some were little more than bones, wrapped in silk. All bore the same signature in the corner, D.B. Delphine Belleterre, her mother, or not her mother, not exactly. The hallway opened into a crypt. Stairs descended into candlelit dampness, and the air grew thick with the scent of old paper and earth. Books lined the walls, journals, dozens of them, each bearing a year and a name. Belle took one at random, 1872 Amélie. She opened it. The handwriting was frantic, beautiful. She read, and what she read was herself. Different name, different details. Same castle, same beast, same game. Some of the girls made it to the ballroom, some to the garden, a few to the west wing, but none made it out, except one, Delphine, who had made a bargain, a terrible binding one that required a daughter, a vessel, a replacement. Belle sank to the floor. All her life she'd felt like a shadow of someone else. Now she knew why. She had never been Belle. She had been prepared. The final journal was unmarked, just a rose embossed on the leather cover. Inside, the pages were blank, except for one line on the first page. Write your ending. Belle stared at it. She looked at the key in her hand, then back at the journal. She dipped her finger in the black ink beside the book and wrote, "The beast died." The candles extinguished instantly. The castle screamed, and somewhere High above, the mirrors shattered all at once. She found him in the ballroom, collapsed, his form shifting, antlers cracking, fur burning away, leaving a boy, then a man, then a girl, then something in between. He was every form she'd ever feared. She knelt beside him. He opened his eyes. They were no longer lanterns, just darkness, empty. "Why?" he whispered. Belle touched his face, not gently. "Because the story needs an ending." His body dissolved into petals, black, brittle and dry. The castle crumbled, not with noise, with silence, like a dream forgotten. When Belle opened her eyes, she stood in the ruins of the garden. No roses, no tree, just broken stone and wind. The sun had returned, weak, frail, but warm. She walked barefoot over the cracked soil. The forest surrounded her, and ahead, past the tree line, a village, small, familiar, real. She walked toward it. The shadows didn't follow, but the whispers did, soft, hopeful, and the sound of someone far behind, stitching a new name into the roots of a forgotten rose. The village was not as she remembered. Belle had walked for hours, or what felt like hours, through the thinning woods, beneath a sun that gave off no warmth, casting light but not life. And when the trees finally parted, and the first rooftops of the town came into view, she felt no joy, no relief, only recognition. It was like stepping into an old painting. Every house was in its place. The crooked church steeple, the leaning inn with its ivy-covered windows, the fountain in the square with the statue of the weeping woman. But the people were gone. Belle wandered the cobbled streets in silence. Doors stood ajar, meals rotted on tables, teacups filled with dust. She knocked on doors. She called out. No answer, not even echoes. Only the crows remained, perched on rooftops, like watchmen, black feathers slick with soot, eyes like glistening coins. They followed her, just like the whispers had. She entered the bookshop. It was exactly as she'd left it. The same worn wooden counter, the same ladder on the far wall, the same tiny bell above the door, and on the table in the centre, a rose, white, fresh, and impossible. Belle approached it, heart slowing. Pinned to the base of the flower was a torn page, not parchment, not paper, skin, words written in blood. You ended one story, but this is the place where stories begin. A shadow moved behind her. She turned. No one. The mirror behind the counter had cracked. Her reflection was smiling. She wasn't. Belle stayed in the village. There was nowhere else to go. Each night, she slept in her childhood room, and each morning, the sky was the same milky grey. The food in the cupboards never spoiled. The candles never ran out. Time had become unstuck, and the village breathed. She heard it in the walls, in the floorboards, in the chimneys and cracks, the hum of something ancient, and buried, watching, waiting. The stories hadn't ended. They had only paused. She wandered the graveyard behind the church one morning and saw a new stone. Her name. No date, no epitaph, just Belle. She scratched it away with her nails until blood ran down her fingertips. By nightfall, it had reappeared. She tried to leave the village once, walked through the woods, past the river, past the old mill, and found herself back at the fountain. Time wasn't the only thing caught in a loop. So was she. The beast was gone, but not dead. Things like that don't die. They become part of the next tale. Belle felt him in the crows, in the fog that rolled in without warning, in the soft scratching at the windows on windless nights. She began to forget her own voice, then her name, then the name of her mother, and slowly the memories unravelled, not vanished, simply filed away, archived, a story told once, then shelved. She began to write, compulsively, endings, mostly, to stories she didn't recognise, but knew by feel. Always the same structure: a girl, a house, a bargain, a door. Sometimes there was a prince, sometimes a beast, sometimes they were the same. Always there was a price, and always a garden. One day she found another rose on the doorstep, black this time, a child's shoe beside it, and a name carved into the wood, Isabeau. She didn't remember the name, but she remembered the feeling. The circle had begun again. She was no longer the heroine. She was the usher, the gatekeeper, the storyteller. Her ink was blood, her quill was bone, and the village, her little grey village, was the cover of a book that never ended. Far beneath the town, in a room carved from salt and candle wax, a mirror pulsed. It held reflections that did not exist, and the face behind the glass was neither Belle nor Delphine, but something older, hungrier. It watched and waited and wrote, because every story needs a beginning, and some girls don't get endings. They get rewritten again and again and again, until they are the story, the beast, and the rose. The wind moved through the empty village. The sky remained grey. The statue wept, and in the garden behind the chapel, the roses bloomed, each one a face, eyes closed, mouth silent, waiting for the next girl to follow the path, to make the deal, to become the next name on the page. Belle closed her journal, looked out the window, and smiled, not from joy, not from sorrow, but from the knowledge that someone was listening, and soon they would come knocking, just like you did.